Imagine that the only thing that brings joy to your life is getting good grades and being the top student in the class. However, despite not getting into trouble or having friends, a certain boy insists on bothering you, but he didn't know that you could defend yourself very well. In a very strange way, being involved in this horrible cycle that exists in many schools around the world leads you to form good friendships with others who suffer the same, and thus, there are many twists in your life, including losses that make you lose your footing. The story begins with our protagonist angrily getting up from his desk and heading toward a classmate, ready to hit him with a book. Then, the scene cuts to 13 days before this incident, and we get to know the routine of the main character, Seun. His life revolves solely around studying hard. Every minute spent away from books is time wasted. This dedication resulted in him taking first place in his school's internal math competition. However, even though he was practically invisible, as Seun wished to be, he suffered from the common issue in many institutions, being bothered for no reason by a specific group of classmates. Yangbin can be considered the leader of this group, and he didn't like it at all when the protagonist warned him to be careful, as victims usually don't stand up for themselves. However, Seun is not easily intimidated. Before a fight could start between the two, the school's athlete group appeared in the room looking for Suho. It turned out that this boy had hit on a girl who was dating the leader of the athletes, and of course, the guys wanted to confront him. However, they didn't expect Suho to be very skilled in martial arts. He even used to fight, which allowed him to handle all the boys by himself. Later at home, we see the protagonist talking to his father, who seems very proud of his son's academic success. It appears that Seun's parents are separated, and the boy lives with his father, while his mother teaches. In her recorded classes, the protagonist takes the opportunity to enhance his knowledge, and perhaps seeing her through a screen makes the longing of not having her around lessen. Being a single father involves some extra expenses, and since he is a team coach, the man spends weeks traveling with the group, often leaving Seun even more lonely. The next day, as usual, the protagonist arrived at school very early. However, in the classroom, Seun found Suho using some desks as a bed, and while he might have cared about his classmate, it would have wasted his extra study time. Later, we see the protagonist in physical education, and unfortunately, Yangbin didn't heed his advice to leave him alone. The boy ended up taking Seun's sports shirt and disappearing with it, leaving the protagonist only with his sweaty clothes, which led to jokes from the same group that caused it. Suho, like the other classmates, heard the jokes, but unlike the rest, he told them to shut up, resulting in sudden silence, as no one expected that. In the locker room, another conflict arose when Seun decided to put an end to the situation. He approached Yangbin to tell him to stop, but it ended with the boy grabbing the protagonist by the neck, stopping only when the teacher arrived to ask if everything was okay. In the next scene, it's nighttime, Seun is already home, and we can see some marks on his neck. The boy is studying when suddenly the doorbell rings, and it's Suho. In this scene, we discover that the boy works as a delivery person and goes to school right after finishing his deliveries so he doesn't have to wake up later and risk being late for class, making it easier to be there. This encounter seems coincidental, as Suho was really surprised to see Seun right in front of him. Unfortunately, the food wasn't for the protagonist, as Suho had gotten the address wrong. The next day, a new student is introduced to the class, and his name is Suk. On his first day, Suk could already sense something was happening between Yangbin and Seun, as they almost got into a fight again, which only didn't happen because Suho subtly intervened. However, at night we see Yangbin with his friends at a club, and there, amidst drinks and illicit activities, provided by his cousin Sukdae, Yangbin has the great idea to affect the protagonist by targeting his grades, the only thing he cares about. Yangbin took a sticker from Sukdae that, when placed on the skin, makes a person calmer, disoriented, even nauseous, and sleepy, which would be perfect to use on Seun during the mock exam. Before putting his plan into action, Yangbin talks to Suk and mentions knowing how much he suffered at his previous school. Thus, he offers Suk protection in exchange for doing him a small favor, sticking a sticker on the protagonist's neck. I believe that out of fear of becoming the one who suffers at Yongbin's hands, Byung-suk agrees, and right after completing the task, Seun starts feeling sleepy, dizzy, nauseous, among other symptoms. Being smart, our protagonist quickly realizes something was stuck on him, but by then, the mock exam time was almost up, and to make the most of the last minutes, Seun starts slapping his own face to wake up. Later, we see that unfortunately, the protagonist ended up making more mistakes than expected due to the incident, and in a moment of losing his temper, Seun just gets up, grabs a book, and heads toward those he was sure were responsible. Then, the protagonist starts hitting Yongbin's face with the book and stabs Taehoon's hand with a pen, stopping only when Suho tries to divert his focus, and then the teacher returns to the classroom. In the next scene, we see the teacher accompanying Seun to the hospital as his guardian, since the protagonist's father is traveling. Everything could have ended badly for Seun if he hadn't collected evidence from Yongbin's backpack, where there was a box with the painkiller the boy had stuck on him. Since the school predictably wanted to cover up the case, it ended with Yongbin being expelled and Seun getting away unscathed. When the protagonist returns home, his father is already there, and the man even questions why he's injured. However, Seun lies that he got hurt in physical education, and of course, the man doesn't believe it, but he can't force his son to tell the truth. The next day, even without Yongbin at school, the rest of the group wants to settle the score with Seun. However, as the protagonist locks them in the bathroom with him and clearly knows how to fight better than the two, the boys quickly give up on starting a fight. Now, Seun became famous among his classmates, however, he doesn't want any attention. In fact, being invisible would be even better, so he pushes away anyone who tries to get close. Meanwhile, Yongbin asked his cousin Sukdae for help, and willing to pay for a service, the tall and strong boy agrees to teach Seun a lesson. The next day, our protagonist regrets trying to hit Suho while he was calming the fight the other day, so Seun starts being nicer to the boy, who seems like a good person. At the same time, we see that Sukdae, besides selling those illicit items and getting involved in paid fights, also seems to participate in running a betting site focused on minors and low-income individuals. Back to the protagonist, Byung-suk tries to apologize to him, but Seun doesn't accept it. Then, Yongbin appears at the school exit with his cousin and their friends. The protagonist is taken by this group to another location, and sensing something was going to happen, Byung-suk decides to ask Suho for help, as the boy knows how to fight well, and since Suho didn't seem very willing, Byung-suk offers to pay for the service. Switching to Seun, we see that he knows how to handle the group attacking him, but it really becomes unfair considering Sukdae's size, so it doesn't take long for the protagonist to be on the ground, with Yongbin taking advantage of it. Soon, Suho arrives to help a potential future friend, and after both groups take hits from each other, Sukdae gets tired of the endless cycle. But before leaving, Seun tells Yongbin once more to let go of the grudge for both their sakes. Despite everyone being sore, Byung-suk, Suho, and the protagonist end up going to a restaurant for dinner. However, before that, they help the owner with orders, deliveries, and cleaning, as she is Suho's aunt. Meanwhile, we see Sukdae and his group with who seems to be their boss. This man, who is introduced to us, would be like the owner of the kids and that betting site. Being a huge scammer, he sees an advantage in the situation that happened earlier, so he breaks Sukdae's arm and plans to use the fight to demand money from the trio, claiming that his best employee ended up like that because of them. In the following days, the new trio of friends grows closer, and for the first time, we see the protagonist seemingly having fun. Later, when he was heading home, it starts to rain, so Seun stops at a convenience store to buy an umbrella. However, there he ends up meeting the girl who is part of Sukdae's group, and unexpectedly, she is very nice to him. Yang-ai is a bit unpredictable, and after demanding a ride under the protagonist's umbrella, she invites him to dinner. At the place, the girl ends up giving her number to Seun, even though it seemed he didn't care to have it. The next day at school, right after gathering his belongings, Yongbin asks to talk to the protagonist in private, who only agrees in a room with his friends present. There, Yongbin kneels and apologizes, begging Seun to follow him somewhere else, using a flimsy excuse, and at that moment, I already felt it wasn't anything good. In the end, the trio followed Yongbin to a parking lot, where they ended up cornered and were introduced to Gil-soo, who put his plan to extort money from them into action. Over the days, each of them noticed they were being followed everywhere, and as the deadline to pay a large sum approached, the boys grew more desperate. So, thinking about everyone's well-being, Beum-suk, who comes from an influential family in the country, decides to sell one of his watches to raise the amount. Meanwhile, the protagonist was talking to Yang-ai, who seemed very willing to reveal everything she knew about Gil-soo, as she no longer liked the life she was leading and couldn't just leave it. On the last payment day, Beum-suk presents the amount they were supposed to pay, however, the other two boys don't want to go down that path. Suho wants to call the police, and Seun wants to get Gil-soo arrested. Thus, the trio and Yang-ai plan a way to bring the authorities to the place where all the evidence of the illegal activities is. First, Suho will be taken there, and when he's at the center of it all, the boy will send the location to Seun, who will arrive with the police. But not everything goes as expected. Suho is discovered in the car, and Gil-soo just waits for them to get home to deal with the boy. Consequently, when Seun and the police arrive at the house where everyone was staying, there is no more evidence, and only a few drops of blood are found on the floor, which worries the protagonist, as Beum-suk was the one who warned him about the plan, and the boy feared something might happen to Suho, as the blame would fall on Seun. Beum-suk also ended up being caught by Gil-soo on the way. The boy tried to hand over the money in exchange for Suho, but in the end, both were now tied up in what seemed to be an abandoned park. Gil-soo called Suk-dae to the park because he believes Suk-dae is involved in this police situation. To convince Suk-dae to show up, he threatens the life of a friend who is very close to both the man and Yang-ai. Suk-dae decides to go to the location alone to protect his friend's safety, who would likely also suffer the consequences. However, Yang-ai secretly follows him and shares her location with the protagonist, allowing the boy to know where his friends are. As soon as Suk-dae arrives, Gil-soo takes out all his anger on the boy and then grabs one of the teenagers to finish the job, reasoning that, since he is still underage, the police won't arrest him. Suho is chosen to be the first one hurt, but soon Suk-dae starts to fight back against Gil-soo. Since Suk-dae is tall and strong, Gil-soo's henchmen hesitate to go up against him, but they end up targeting Yang-ai. It doesn't take long for the protagonist to show up, however, since the police didn't answer his call, he comes up with the idea to play a police siren sound on his phone and hide it, buying some time. This way, Gil-soo flees with his henchmen, while Seun unties their friends. Soon after, Gil-soo's group returns upon realizing it was a trick and starts fighting the trio. The protagonist ends up with a cut on his face, but before things could get any worse, the police finally arrive. Of course, Gil-soo tries to find a way to escape, even if it means leaving his group behind, but Seun isn't about to let him get away so easily and chases after him. When he catches up, being very tired and not very fit, it doesn't take long for Gil-soo to bring him down. But soon Suho arrives, and together the two manage to stop Gil-soo. Suk-dae could have run away and avoided being accused as one of Gil-soo's allies, but he decided to stay and take responsibility for the wrongs he had done. At the police station, Seun and Beum-suk were told they didn't need to give statements, but were required to keep the incident a secret, even from their families. As soon as the protagonist leaves, we see Beum-suk upset with what appears to be the investigator, and he says that he begged the man not to tell his father, but it seems it's already too late. Beum-suk is the son of a congressman, and as such, the authority demanded that his son repay Gil-soo for the treatment he received from him. However, Beum-suk doesn't want to be violent, so it's the investigator who does the job. Meanwhile, Suho receives a visit from the protagonist at the hospital. He's accompanied by Yang-ai, who has now become part of the group and will stay with Suho for a while. Back to Beom-suk, at home, the boy suffers consequences from his father for getting into trouble and also for not making Gil-soo suffer by his own hands. At that moment, I felt really uneasy watching the scene. The next day, Beom-suk realized that at school, the trio was now seen as the cool guys, and the boy actually enjoyed this new reputation. However, that wasn't the only thing that changed. Now Yang-ai is being invited to hang out with the boys, and Beom-suk is getting increasingly irritated by it, or maybe he's feeling jealous. At night, the protagonist has dinner with his mother, and as usual, she doesn't seem to pay much attention to what he says. In the next scene, the group is at karaoke, and when Beom-suk leaves to get drinks, some boys from his old school spot him. But instead of greeting them, Beom-suk hides. Beom-suk ends up leaving his phone in the room with his friends, and while he's gone, Yang-ai answers it. It's those boys, and since she couldn't imagine there'd be a problem, Yang-ai ends up telling them the room number they're in. As soon as Beom-suk comes back, he argues with Yang-ai, causing her to leave, and Suho as well. That way, only the protagonist is left with Beom-suk when the boys arrive, and Seun immediately senses something is wrong. Over the following days, Beom-suk becomes increasingly violent, and as even his friends start asking him to calm down, the boy locks himself in his room for a few days. Meanwhile, Suho starts teaching Seun to fight and defend himself better. After a few days, the duo decided to go to Beom-suk's house, and they were warmly welcomed. There, we find out that Beom-suk is actually adopted. The congressman decided to do so when he got into politics, as a marketing move. Soon, Seun asks if Beom-suk is feeling this way because of the boys from the other day, and at that moment, Beom-suk tells them everything he suffered at their hands. Then Suho says he'll make those kids apologize to him, so Beom-suk calls to arrange another meeting at the karaoke. At the venue, after Suho shows that he's not someone to mess with, the boys apologize, but then Beom-suk goes overboard and says he wants to beat them up. Suho stops his friend from doing something stupid. After all, he realizes how out of control Beom-suk is, and this causes the spoiled boy to end up fighting with his own friend. That way, Beom-suk ends up walking the streets alone, and since the other group wants to settle the score, they go after the congressman's son. Luckily for Beom-suk, he runs into classmates from his new school who aren't fans of the rich kids from the private school. So, they fulfill Beom-suk's wish to take down those boys. After taking money from the rich kids, Beom-suk's classmates invite him out for drinks, and he ends up spending the night at a nightclub. And since we know Beom-suk has money, his classmates take advantage of that to become his friends. In fact, Beom-suk pays for everything and basically buys their friendship. In the following days, Seun notices that Beom-suk is acting very differently, but since the boy starts ignoring him, there's not much he can do. Beom-suk keeps going out partying with his classmates, and since those boys are friends with Yang Bin, they eventually run into each other. One night, Beom-suk meets Woo Young. This guy is a professional fighter, and when Woo Young fought Suho, he lost, but Woo Young is sure that after his latest training, he'll win next time. In the following days, Beom-suk starts breaking school rules, and after cutting in line at the cafeteria, Suho had a disagreement with him, and rightly so. Feeling humiliated, Beom-suk offered to pay someone to take care of Suho, and the chosen one was Woo Young. However, afraid that even though Woo Young is now a professional fighter, he might lose again, Beom-suk asks his classmates to find a way for Suho to get hurt before the fight, not that he even knows there will be a fight yet. In any case, after they cut the brakes on Suho's motorcycle, the boy ends up in an accident and is taken to the hospital. Even though Suho didn't see Beom-suk doing anything, he knows the accident was the boy's fault. So, the next day, he makes it very clear to Beom-suk that he should forget about him. However, Beom-suk still wants Woo Young to deal with his former friend. Since Suho starts ignoring his messages, on the day of the trap, which is also his birthday, Byung-suk ends up luring Yang-ai to the location and grabbing her, so Soo-ho will have no choice but to go there. However, it's the protagonist who ends up seeing the messages on Soo-ho's phone. Wanting to put an end to all of this so he can get back to celebrating with his friend, Si-eun decides to turn off Soo-ho's phone and go to the location alone, without letting his best friend know what's happening. As soon as he arrives, Si-eun gets ready to fight. At first, he tries to escape with Yang-ai, but stays behind so his friend can go get help. Si-eun doesn't stand a chance against Woo-young, and since Yang-bin is also there, he takes the opportunity to finish his revenge. Byung-suk even tries to get the boys to stop. After all, he has nothing against the protagonist, but his pleas don't work, and in the end, we see Si-eun being taken away by an ambulance. While being rescued, the protagonist asks Yang-ai not to say anything to Soo-ho because he knows his best friend would go after Byung-suk, and Si-eun doesn't want to see anyone else get hurt. He also calls Byung-suk and asks him to leave them alone. Although the protagonist didn't report Byung-suk, the incident reached the ears of the congressman, who quickly assigned his men the task of finding a school abroad for him. In the ensuing days, Soo-ho knew something had happened. Since his birthday, he hadn't heard anything from his best friend. Not only had Byung-suk stopped attending school, something that never happened before, but he also disappeared from classes entirely. Seeking answers, Soo-ho began to follow Byung-suk's new group of friends. It didn't take long before the boys let slip what had occurred. Shortly after, Soo-ho went to see Yang-ai, who asked him to leave the whole ordeal alone, especially since that's what Si-eun wanted as well. Still, Soo-ho's next stop was his best friend. When it came to the protagonist, Soo-ho pretended not to know anything about the incident and didn't question Si-eun's injuries. He simply greeted him and asked if he would be taking the final exams at school the following day. Then, he quickly said goodbye and left. Meanwhile, Byung-suk was suffering punishment at the hands of his father for what he had done to his friend. Still, it didn't seem like the boy felt anything that would make him change his ways. Before boarding the plane to leave for another country, Soo-ho asked to meet with him again. And once more, Byung-suk called the same people who had already hurt Si-eun. Regarding the fight, the scenes were brutal and very well made, so intense that there were moments when I couldn't watch the screen. Soo-ho practically defeated Woo-young on his own, but when the other boys began to interfere and knocked him to the ground, Byung-suk took the opportunity to invite them into the ring. In a cowardly act, they ganged up on Soo-ho, who tried to protect himself until he stopped breathing. Once the crime was confirmed, the congressman naturally ensured none of it leaked to the public, with his men taking care of everything. But Soo-ho's life would never go back to the way it was before, and let me tell you, I cried a lot during this scene. The story told to the protagonist and Soo-ho's family was that he had been working out with his friends, the same ones he didn't even get along with, and that he simply collapsed. Of course, the protagonist didn't believe a single word of it. He ran to the hospital where Soo-ho was being treated. But Soo-ho would never wake up again. Seeing his friend relying on machines to survive, with his grandmother by his side, gave Si-eun the strength to seek revenge. Yang-bin was the first name on his list. The boy even handed over a crucial piece of evidence to the protagonist, a video placing everyone at the crime scene. Next, Si-eun visited Woo-young. During this confrontation, the protagonist sustained serious injuries. However, Woo-young was left in such a state that he might never walk again. Afterward, Si-eun's former classmates received the punishment they deserved. When he finally confronted Byung-suk, Si-eun reminded him how he had begged him to leave them alone and questioned why he had done all of this. But even Byung-suk didn't know why he had gone so far. That was the only answer he could give. In the end, Byung-suk went abroad to study. Yang-ai took the blame for everything and later disappeared, though she occasionally visits Soo-ho and his family. The congressman wanted to send the protagonist to a reform school. However, thanks to the video Si-eun obtained, the only consequence was that he had to transfer schools. Even that proved difficult, as the congressman made sure no institution in the city would accept him. The protagonist's new school was far inferior compared to his old one. As soon as he arrived, the cycle began again, a specific group started bothering him. But will Seun let it slide this time? What did you think of this season? I hope you enjoyed the recap. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe to the channel. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and share it to support me. See you next time.